The auditorium lights hummed low, like a secret being whispered just out of reach. Rows of velvet seats soaked up the hush of the crowd, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and cheap wood polish clinging to the air. I adjusted the mic on the podium. For Sophia with practiced hands, my hands. She was behind me, checking her lipstick in the reflection of her phone, the same way she always did before a talk. Confident, composed. God, she was good at this. She caught my eye in the mirror. "You always make things easier," she said, brushing her fingers along my arm in a way that used to feel like affection. "Break a leg," I said, smiling. But the words felt heavy in my mouth. She kissed my cheek, a whisper of contact, then turned away without waiting for the moment to settle. Her perfume lingered, not the vanilla and smoke blend I'd picked for her birthday last year. Something new, something sharp. I took my place in the back row, third seat from the aisle. From here, I could see the spot where the stage lights caught the silver in her hair, the streak she once begged me to dye out, until I told her it made her look like she carried lightning. Her name lit up the screen in bold serif font, Sophia. RAINAR stories that transform use. She stepped onto the stage like she owned it. And maybe she did, but when she opened her mouth, the words were mine, not vaguely mine. Not borrowed themes or similar phrasing. No, word for word, the opening. Monologue from the quiet after, the screenplay we started together during lockdown. The lines I had scribbled on yellow legal pads at 3 a.m, high on grief and chamomile tea. Sometimes we write because the silence becomes too loud, she said, her voice soft, evocative, practiced. And sometimes we steal stories because living them costs too much. The audience leaned in. I did too, as if proximity could rewrite reality. No mention of me. No, I kept waiting for it. For a nod, a gesture, even the usual vague acknowledgement. I had help from someone special, but nothing came. She moved through every scene, every metaphor, even the climactic anecdote, a story about a childhood lake house and a broken bracelet, which was pulled, nearly verbatim, from a journal entry I'd read to her one night after a fight, curled in bed with salt in my eyes, and she told it like it had always belonged to her dog. My stomach churned. My hands clenched so tight the playbill crumpled. When she bowed, the crowd erupted, a standing ovation. I watched her eyes scan the room, searching for praise, not connection. She didn't look for me. The house lights dimmed again as the crew scrambled to set up the next speaker. Sophia disappeared backstage, followed by her manager and a couple of eager interns. I stood slowly. The blood had drained from my legs, leaving behind a dull ache. I thought I would walk out, disappear into the night like smoke. But then her voice, sharp and clear, crackled through the speaker above the exit. God, I can't believe that worked. A laugh. No one even asked about sources this time. There was a beat of static. Then, she still thinks I love her. Let her. It helps me work. I froze. The technician at the soundboard lunged for the controls, face pale. Feedback whined. Through the room before the mic cut off completely. My knees nearly gave out. The theater spun, a few heads turned, puzzled, but the audience began drifting toward the lobby. Eager for drinks and chatter, I slipped down the side hallway, following the faint echo of her voice, desperate for some impossible alternative ending. Maybe it was a joke, a misunderstanding, but I reached the green room just as her laughter rang out again, unguarded and glossy, the way it only sounded when she didn't think anyone was listening. She was crying after I read her that lake. House Peace. Said it was the most vulnerable thing she'd ever written. She laughed again. Now it's going in the book. I didn't step in. I didn't speak. I just stood there, invisible, watching the woman I had loved perform her life like a script. She never wrote. I left quietly, The city air hit my lungs like glass. Outside, the street pulsed with Friday night noise, taxis honking, laughter spilling from rooftop bars, the endless shuffle of people moving somewhere. I stood at the corner, letting the red light hold me in place. I touched the side of my face, where she kissed me hours earlier, and I couldn't remember what it felt like. The woman I trusted with my words, my story, my name, had been wearing a mask the entire time, and tonight she forgot to take it off. I met her at a writing retreat in the middle of the Oregon woods, a place where rain dripped from the pine needles like punctuation, and every conversation started with a half confession. I was there because I didn't know what else to do with. The silence inside me. Sophia arrived 2 days late, the kind of woman who made lateness look like a birthright. She wore a crimson coat and carried no umbrella, raindrops clinging to her curls like punctuation marks. Her boots were muddy, her scarf trailed behind her, and every eye followed her when she entered the lodge. I remember her turning to me during the first group writing session, where I'd barely said 5 words. "You write like you've been cut open," she said after reading my piece. "That's rare." I didn't know that compliments like hers had barbs, that they were both invitation and claim. She sought me out at meals, asked me to read her fragments late at night. Her stories were beautiful but scattered. She said she couldn't finish anything, not until she met me. "You ground me," she whispered once in the dark. I thought it was love. Maybe it was. Maybe for a moment, it was something real. She moved into my 1-bedroom apartment in Portland a month later, uninvited but welcome. She didn't bring much: a suitcase of vintage coats, an old camera she never used, and stacks of notebooks she claimed held the real work. She hung up her paintings on the walls and replaced my throw pillows without asking. It was like she was remaking the space to look like her, and I let her. She called me her anchor. Said the city overwhelmed her unless she had my tea in the morning, my edits in the margins, my voice reading her lines aloud. I let her log into my submittable account. I proofread her cover letters, rewrote the metaphors that didn't land, even named a central character after my mother, Irene, who'd passed the year before. That character, that name, would eventually headline Sophia's first published short story in Dust and Light Quarterly, with no mention of the origin. When I asked why, she looked at me like I was ruining something. "Beautiful. It's simpler this way," she said, brushing it off. "No one really cares who wrote what. It's the story that matters." I wanted to believe her. We called it collaboration. She called me her quiet genius, and I clung to the idea that behind her spotlight, I was still the reason the room went dim. I stopped taking freelance gigs to focus on her projects. We'd sit at the kitchen table until 2 a.m., me with a pencil in hand, her reciting lines and chewing on ice cubes. I watched her career swell while mine stalled. And still, I loved her. My friends began noticing first. "She didn't credit you on the film site," Nina said after Sophia's short premiered at a downtown indie showcase. I shrugged. "I told her it was fine," I lied. "She flirts with that agent like she's single," Leah whispered after a launch party. I told her she was being dramatic. But the seed had been planted. It's strange how gaslighting doesn't always arrive like a slap. Sometimes it feels like water dripping, quietly, steadily, until you're soaked before you even realize it's raining. Once, I caught her submitting one of our monologues to a fellowship under just her name. When I confronted her, she tilted her head and said, "But you always say you don't want the spotlight." I did say that, but I didn't mean erasure. Still, I said nothing. I told myself it was love, that we were a unit, that when she made it, we both would. One night, after a reading in Seattle where I carried her notes and waited outside while she schmoozed with editors, we sat in the motel room while she removed her makeup in the yellow bathroom light. "You know," she said, "casually, people see us as a power couple." I stared at her. but I don't have any power. She laughed, thinking I was joking. It was around that time I noticed the password to our shared Google Drive had been changed. She blamed a hacker. I didn't believe her. I tried to write something of my own then. Sat in front of my laptop for hours, but everything I put down sounded like her, or like the version of me she had cultivated. We stopped sleeping at the same time. She stayed out later. She started keeping her phone face down. I knew, on some level, I knew. But knowing and leaving are two very different acts, and I wasn't ready for the second one, and so I kept editing. I kept loving. I kept giving her permission to shape me into a shadow, because the idea of being alone again, of being unwritten, scared me more than betrayal, until it didn't. After the mic incident, I waited for her to come home. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just waited, the kind of stillness that comes after a fire. When everything is already ashdot, she came through the door humming, dropping her bag by the table like always. The response was amazing, she said, scrolling through her phone. Twitter's already buzzing. I think this one's going viral. I was standing by the bookshelf. You left your mic on, I said. She paused, fingers still tapping the screen. What? They heard you. Backstage. I did too. She turned, finally looking at me. Her expression flickered, not guilt, not panic, just irritation. Oh, she said, setting her phone down. That, a shrug. I was joking. You said I still think you love me, that it helps you work. Sophia tilted her head, smiling like a teacher correcting a slow student. You know how people talk backstage? It's all performance, baby. Like theater warm-ups. I felt something shift inside me, something small but vital, like the pop of a stitch holding skin together. You used my story, I said, my voice too quiet, word for word. You didn't even change the ending. Oh, come on, that was our story. You never wanted the credit, remember? I gave it life. I made it matter. No, I said. You made it yours. And then she delivered the blow without flinching. You're not a writer. You're a muse. You inspire. You don't create. That word hit harder than any slap ever could. A muse. A silent silhouette. A vessel. A girl without a name. I've edited every one of your scripts. You've used lines from my emails, from my journals. She held up a hand, cutting me off. Don't start this. No, I'm going to finish it. She crossed her arms. You want to ruin me? Go ahead. Just know how bitter you'll look. Nobody likes a jealous ex. My breath caught. She wasn't even pretending anymore. That night, she went to dinner with her agent. I didn't ask where. I didn't care. When the door clicked shut behind her, I stood in the middle of our apartment, the place I once called home. I saw everything with new eyes. The signed poster of her first film framed above the couch, where my name had been conveniently forgotten. The bookshelf I built with my bare hands now lined with hardcovers that quoted me without acknowledgement. I opened the bottom drawer of her writing desk. It stuck for a second, the way it always did. Inside were contracts, receipts, printed emails. I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted proof I hadn't imagined this life. That's when I saw it. The publishing agreement dotted had her name on it. In neat bold letters, a memoir. The title was a phrase I once used in a poem, Weathered Girls and Quiet Fires. My stomach lurched. I flipped through the pages. There they were. Entire essays I had written. Journal entries from when I was 16, scanned and transcribed. Paragraphs about my mother's death, about my fear of disappearing. She hadn't just stolen my words. She'd archived my grief, and she was going to print it, sell it, sign it. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt everything collapse. I didn't sleep that night. I just packed slowly, sweaters, notebooks, my old laptop, the olive leaf necklace. My mother gave me the year before she passed. I deleted our shared drafts, emptied the cloud drive, and backed up what I could. Then I opened a new document blank for a long time. I stared at the blinking cursor like it was daring me to begin again. Instead, I opened my voice recorder. The red circle glowed. "My name is not Sophia," I said, my voice trembling. But these words always were, and I spoke, not like a performer, not like a muse, but like someone clawing her way out of the margins. I told the story of the retreat, the lake house, the first kiss in the snow, the betrayal hidden under candlelight, and poetry. I didn't cry. I didn't stutter. When I finished, I saved the file. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, only that it was mine. Later, I walked around the apartment for the last time, touched the spines of books I bought, ran my fingers across the initials carved into the kitchen table, looked into the mirror by the front door, the one where she first said she loved me. I looked like a ghost, but for the first time, I also looked like someone who could haunt back. I zipped my bag, left her manuscript on the coffee table, opened to the page with my journal entry and the line I once wrote to myself during my darkest winter: "Even if no one remembers your name, remember it yourself." When the door clicked shut behind me, it didn't echo. It thudded, soft and final, like a book closing. I didn't cry until the bus pulled away. And even then, it wasn't grief. It was the sound of my name returning to me. I vanished without drama. No final text, no teary goodbye. Just a one-way bus ticket to the coast, my sister's name on the lease, and the quiet intention to disappear. The cottage I rented was chipped and crooked, the kind of place the wind always found its way into. Blue paint flaked off the shutters like old scabs. The front porch leaned slightly to the left, and the floorboards groaned when I walked. I picked it because no one would think to look for me here. I slept for 2 straight. Dazed out when I woke, I stared at the ceiling for hours. There was no ticking clock, no city noise, no Sophia. Just silence, sharp and unfamiliar, like the room was holding its breath, waiting to see who I'd become. There was a pine tree at the edge of the property. I started walking to it every morning, barefoot on wet grass, flannel wrapped tight around me like a memory I hadn't yet unpacked. I tied a thin white ribbon around the lowest branch on the first day. It had once belonged to the journal Sophia found and scanned. I cut it from the spine with a kitchen knife. Each morning I passed it again. I touched that ribbon. A symbol. I'd survived another day. Weeks blurred. I ate too little. Slept too much. Cried in the bath, in the pantry, on the floor by the fridge. But somewhere in that mess, I began writing again. Not for her. Not for a publication. Just for me. Journaling. Mostly scattered lines, observations, the way the rain sounded against the cottage roof, the way grief pulled behind the ribs instead of in the chest. I stopped judging what came out. I stopped asking if it was good. One day, I wandered into the town's used bookstore, an old converted firehouse with crooked shelves and mismatched mugs hanging behind the register. That's where I met Maggie. She wore cardigans that smelled like sage and vanilla, and she had the soft kind of voice that made even silence feel like conversation. "You new in town?" she asked. I nodded, not ready to say more. She didn't push, just handed me a book, Mary Oliver's Devotions. "You might need this more than you know." I read it cover to cover that night. Eventually, I started visiting the shop regularly. Maggie never pried, but she noticed things, like the mornings I skipped breakfast or the afternoons. I lingered too long in the poetry section. "Grief," she said one day, sliding a cup of chamomile toward me, "likes to hide in your routines." I nodded, unable to speak. On a rainy Tuesday, I left a poem on the bookstore's front desk. A quiet, untitled thing about the pine tree and the ribbon and the ache of starting over. I didn't sign it. The next day, it was in the window, printed in soft ink, framed between two old typewriter keys. The tag beneath it read, "Written by Anonymous." I stood in the street staring at it for a long time, that small act being read. Again, cracked something open. Not a wound, but a door. Bit by bit, I began rebuilding. I took on small freelance jobs under a new pen name. Ghostwriting bios, editing travel blogs, writing newsletters for a candle company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. And no one asked where I came from. I bought a second-hand desk from Maggie's brother, set it by the window facing the sea, and let the wind turn pages I hadn't even written yet. Some nights I laughed. Full-bellied, unexpected laughter that felt like it didn't belong to me but stayed anyway. Other nights I stared at the ceiling and wondered if Sophia even noticed I was gone. But mostly, I worked out not just on healing, but on remembering. I dug through old drives, backed up what I could, organized emails, drafts, timestamps, and metadata. All the invisible threads that connected my words to her success. It was slow, painstaking work, but there was power in it. Proof. I printed every draft she'd borrowed from, labeled them in red pen. I compared versions, circled lifted paragraphs, built a spreadsheet with links and submission dates. I wasn't just remembering anymore. I was recording. Every betrayal had a receipt now, a timestamp, a name, and none of it was hers. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but it felt like reclaiming bone from beneath skin. I started to fill my mirror with post-it notes, not affirmations, but evidence of becoming. Snippets from poems, words that felt like mine again. Voice is not volume. Invisible does not mean erased. Say your name out loud, even when no one's listening. Each ribbon on the pine tree marked a week. I was up to 12. 12 weeks of not shrinking. 12 weeks of not asking for permission to exist. One morning, I walked past the ribbon and whispered my real name to the wind. Just once. Just for me. And it felt like returning home to a place I'd never been. It had been a year since the night I whispered my name to the pine tree and let it echo back with meaning. A year since I watched the sea dissolve the last traces of who I had been with her. And still, she haunted pages I hadn't written, lines I'd never published, metaphors only I could have made. Sophia was everywhere. Festival panels, literary salons, morning talk shows with soft lighting and soft lies. She was charming, eloquent, tragic when it served her. Her debut memoir was titled "The Light We Borrow," a phrase pulled from one of my old essays about grief. I knew the sentence she took it from. I knew the way it ended too. And the people who pretend it's their own. I tracked it all from the coast, quietly. I didn't stalk, I studied. Watched her repurpose the life we lived into clever anecdotes about her creative solitude. The couch I cried on became a place she claimed to find poetic silence. The book of mine she'd read in tears, word for word, now appeared as a scene, where she read it aloud to me for comfort. She was clever like that, selective memory as performance art. But this time, I wasn't the discarded part of the story. I reached out to a podcast producer, a rising show with a reputation for digging into quiet scandals, whispers between pages. I sent one message. Would you like to hear the real story behind The Light We Borrow? No names, just voice, clips, scan drafts, metadata, side-by-side comparisons. Then, finally, a voice memo, mine, calm, low, tired but sharp. There's something sacred about authorship. Not fame, not credit, authorship. And when someone else takes that from you, they're not just stealing words. They're erasing your very existence from your own narrative. The producers responded in 2 days. They were cautious, skeptical, but intrigued. I spoke with measured fire. I never said her name. I didn't need to. I let the receipts speak for me. Timestamp drafts, Audio files with my voice reading essays 2 years before her book deal. Even a recording of her once saying, "I wish I could write like you. Sometimes I just borrow your rhythm to get started." I had that on tape. The podcast went live on a Thursday morning under the title, Authorship, a Story Reclaimed. Within hours, the internet began stitching things together. Passages were compared. Archive links resurfaced. My anonymous poetry, once hung in a bookstore window, was matched word for word with entire chapters in The Light We Borrow. The comments exploded. I loved Sophia's memoir, but this makes me sick. I knew some of those metaphors. Felt too good to be hers. She didn't just borrow light, she stole the whole damn fire. A hashtag began. Hashtag her voice was stolen. It trended for 3 days. Readers, writers, poets, even editors chimed in. Some defended her. Most didn't. Someone made a comparison chart. Someone else dug up the scam childhood journals I had mentioned in the podcast and found exact quotes. Embedded in Sophia's final chapter, the dam cracked wide open, and in the chaos of it all, the mentions, the media outlets, the fury. Came a single message, an invitation. The subject line was simple: Storytelling Summit, special panel request. I opened it with shaking hands. We're curating a panel on authorship, silence, and reclamation. One of our keynote speakers, Sophia, her name made my throat close for a moment, will be honored during the closing ceremony. We believe your story deserves the same stage. Would you consider joining us as a surprise guest? It wasn't revenge they were offering. It was something more dangerous. Truth. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed my laptop and walked the pine tree. The ribbon was frayed now, white dulled by salt air and weather. I tied a new one beside it, bright red, a marker. Not of survival, but return. The ballroom hadn't changed, still lit in warm gold. Still echoing with clinks of glasses and literary laughter. Still full of people dressed in intellectual elegance, silk scarves and statement glasses, wine-stained teeth and curated anecdotes. But I had changed. I walked in wearing slate gray. Sharp lines, clean silhouette. My hair pulled back, a thin necklace resting over my collarbone. I carried nothing but a single folded page. And my name, not hers, mine. Sophia didn't see me at first. She stood on stage, framed in light, smiling, like she was born for it. And maybe she was. Some people are skilled at performing sincerity. She began her speech. We all have stories. Some we live, some we inherit, some we borrow. A hush fell over the room when the MC stepped forward. Before we close, she said, we have a special moment. A guest whose voice, until now, has remained just outside the margins. I step forward. No music. No spotlight. Just my steps. And my voice. I didn't look at Sophia. I didn't need to. I unfolded the page. Read only one paragraph. A paragraph she once published under her name. Then I held up the original. Time-stamped print. Proof. Silence thickened around me. Then I said, I am not here for vengeance. I am here to name myself. Not in contrast to someone else, but in full, because the most painful erasure isn't silence. It's when your voice is used against you and applauded. The applause started slow. Then swelled. Some people looked stunned. Some looked away. Sophia stood stone still, lips slightly parted, mask slipping, but I didn't wait for her reaction. I walked off stage without a bow, without a glance, because I wasn't her shadow anymore. I was the author now. The ballroom was cathedral quiet, that kind of hush that sits in the chest, not the ears. Chandeliers shimmered like suspended breath. Rows of velvet seats filled with industry elites, editors, festival directors, literary agents, camera crews. I watched them through a narrow curtain slit from backstage, hidden in the dark. They waited for her. Not me. Not yet. Sophia emerged in ivory silk. Her gown shimmered with intention. The color of purity, of wedding dresses and forgiveness. She was poised, radiant, the epitome of grace repackaged as narrative. Cameras flashed. The crowd leaned forward. Voice rang out, practiced, honeyed, musical, like a violin played by muscle memory. Stories are not just what we write, they are what we carry, what we inherit, what we share. She paused for effect. The audience murmured approval. A well-timed tear gathered in the corner of her eye. And sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones spoken in silence. Silence. I felt it then. A current rippling under the floorboards. Not applause. Not admiration. Something else. Anticipation. I watched from the shadows, my fingers curled around a tiny remote in my palm. The cue had been agreed on earlier. A simple nod to the MC. The signal to roll the tribute video. I didn't nod. I clicked it. Myself. The screen behind her flickered once, twice, then bloomed into black and white, static before revealing its first image, a scan of a handwritten journal page. The room went. Still. My voice, calm, grounded, unmistakable, filled the air like wildfire and thunder. These are the words she forgot to think. A second page appeared, then a third. Dated drafts scanned from notebooks, paragraphs in my looping script. The same words that appeared nearly unchanged. In the closing chapter of The Light We Borrow, a shot of our old apartment followed. A grainy video. Sophia on the couch, flipping through my pages, nodding as I read aloud. My voice layered over it now. She said she borrowed my light, but she never asked. And she never returned it. Gasps echoed. A few people turned to look. At Sophia. She didn't move. Her smile had cracked in the corner. Her fingers twitched near the mic stand. More images filled the screen. A side-by-side comparison of my private essay and her published chapter. My handwriting. Her typeset theft. The silence turned electric. Then I walked on stage. Not announced. Not escorted. Just there. My boots sounded louder than they should have. I crossed the stage slowly, deliberately, stopping a few feet from her. She looked at me like I was a ghost she'd prayed would stay dead. I didn't speak. Not yet. The video played its final slide, a single quote, my own. My name isn't on her cover, but it's written between every line. Then the screen faded to black. I stepped up to the mic. Let the hush deepen, stretch, ache. People shifted in their seats. Some held breath. I looked at her, then at them. Then I spoke. Stories are sacred. They are how we survive, how we map meaning, how we leave pieces of ourselves behind. I didn't need to raise my voice. My words, my voice, lived inside her book, but not my name, not my story. Just my language, stripped of context and rebranded as inspiration. I turned slightly, scanning the crowd. I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to name myself. I pulled a folded page from my coat pocket, the original paragraph she had taken for her dedication page. I held it up. This was mine, dated, archived, recorded. It existed long before her memoir. And yet she stood here, before you, and claimed it as part of her personal journey. Sophia's mouth opened, but no sound came. I didn't let her speak. I do not want an apology. I do not want her stage. I want only to remind you and her that silence is not consent, that erasure is not forgetfulness, and that authorship, real authorship, is not performance. She stepped forward slightly. Sophia, I said softly, say my name this time. The audience held their breath. Cameras panned between us. She swallowed. Her eyes glistened. She stammered, voice breaking. I didn't think. You didn't have to think, I said gently. You had to choose, and you did. Her shoulders sagged. Her image cracked. The spotlight didn't love her the same anymore. I turned to the audience one last time. Truth is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives slowly, in pieces, in whispers. But when it arrives, it changes everything. I stepped back from the mic. People clapped, not thunderously, not out of performance, but steadily, earnestly, like they understood the weight of what had just happened. A few stood, others nodded with wet eyes. Sophia stayed frozen, her face unreadable, and I walked off stage. The hallway was long and dim, quiet again. The kind of quiet that didn't feel lonely anymore. I passed a mirror, stopped, stared, for a long time. I hadn't recognized the woman who stared back. She had been a ghost in her own reflection, a whisper without echo. But now she stood tall, mouth steady, eyes clear. I nodded at her. She nodded back. Not invisible anymore, just me, fully. And for the first time in years, that was enough.